Our very, very special guest this evening, Professor Richard Aldous, Chair of History in UCD. Richard is using his great skills tonight as an observer of rhetoric, and having left UCD to be the Roger Mayer Professor in Bard, and we're delighted that he's taken some time to be here tonight to talk to us on the theme of the Proclamation of the Irish Republic. So Richard, I'm very, very honoured to welcome you. Thank you for being with us this evening.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you to the Consulate General of Ireland, the New York State Ancient Order of Hibernians, the Ladies Ancient Order of Hibernians, and the New York GAA for inviting me to give this second lecture in the Consulate's historical lecture series to mark the centenary next year of 1916. I'd like to particularly, there she is, I'd like to particularly thank the Consul General, Barbara Jones. The Consul General and I both share the privilege of having written for Bertie Ahern at different stages, but I was struck as I was coming over tonight that as she was the one who was writing speeches, really it should be you up here talking about rhetoric rather than me. But I think actually one of the exciting things about her tenure as Consul General has been events like this, the cultural events that also bring in history. I'm thinking particularly of the 150th anniversary of Yeats, when there was a wonderful performance at the Morgan Library given by members of the Abbey Theatre, her launching with Colm Tóibín of my good friend Harry White's fantastic encyclopedia of music in Ireland. And I think that, of course, these 1916 lectures are part of her commitment, that of the Consulate General and the Department of Foreign Affairs, to commemorating the founding event of the modern Irish state in imaginative and analytical ways. I'd also, before I start, just like to thank Fergal Titley, who is going to, well, you'll see, is going to be helping me this evening. Now, as my good friend and former UCD colleague Mary Daly said when she was here to deliver the first lecture in this series, commemorations as an exercise have a peculiar history in Ireland, and I think none more so than 1916. In the early years of the Irish state, the bitterness that remained through the Civil War made commemorations divisive affairs with regular efforts to appropriate the memory of 1916 for overtly political reasons. On the other side, by the time we get to the 75th anniversary in 1991, the Hockey government did almost everything possible to try and forget 1916 for fear that it would give succour to the provisional IRA. So by the time we got to the 90th anniversary in 2006, when, as the Consul General said, I was living in Ireland myself, things really had changed. And as the then Taoiseach Bertie Ahern pointed out, when he opened the official exhibition of the Easter Rising held at the National Museum in Collins Barracks, he said, just as nobody should seek to own Irish history, nobody should seek to disown it either. Ireland's history, he said, is a shared legacy and a continuous thread. That's something that I want to reflect on a bit tonight in talking about the rhetoric of the Proclamation. Now, of course, 1916 is the foundational myth of the modern Irish state, Ireland 1776, if you like, it's sometimes easy to forget that the actual event itself was a relatively small scale event. Involved only around 1,500 people. It didn't even last for a week. But that small-scale event, of course, became the springboard for the Sinn Féin election landslide in 1918, the War of Independence in 1919 to 21, and the creation of the Irish Free State the following year in 1992. And in part, of course, it became that keystone because of the crass overreaction of the British to the Rising in 1916. It's a very good new book on this by David Reynolds called The Long Shadow, that looks at the archives around the decision to, for example, execute 16 members or participants in the Rising, which of course gave Ireland its martyrs. But another reason that the Rising was so central was because it gave Ireland its indispensable document, the Proclamation of the Irish Republic. And again, to quote from that earlier speech on the 90th anniversary, the Proclamation was the foundation of the independent Irish state. Now, in his book, Inventing Ireland, another of my former UCD colleagues, Declan Kybert, points out how so often at critical moments in Ireland's history, Irish leaders thought of themselves in theatrical, dramatic terms, and no more so than in 1916. Because the proclamation of the Irish Republic was not simply, and the Easter Rising was not simply an event. It was not simply about action on the street. The Easter Rising, crucially, was an event that was scripted and was articulated. So what happens? Around noon on Easter Monday, April 24th, 1916, a group of Irish nationalists, including from the Irish Citizen Army and the Irish Volunteers, marched out the General Post Office into Dublin's Sackville Street, now O'Connell Street, where in the GPO they had just raised a flag on the building bearing the words Irish Republic. Led by 5 members of the Military Council of the Irish Republican Brotherhood, there they proclaimed Ireland's independence from Britain. Let's listen in.
Poblacht na hÉireann, the Provisional Government of the Irish Republic, to the people of Ireland. Irish men and Irish women, in the name of God and of the dead generations from which she receives her old tradition of nationhood, Ireland, through us, summons her children to her flag and strikes for her freedom. We declare the right of the people of Ireland to the ownership of Ireland and to the unfettered control of Irish destinies to be sovereign and indefeasible. The long usurpation of that right by a foreign people and government has not extinguished the right, nor can it ever be extinguished except by the destruction of the Irish people. In every generation, the Irish people have asserted their right to national freedom and sovereignty. 6 times during the past 300 years, they have asserted it in arms. Standing on that fundamental right, and again asserting it in arms in the face of the world, we hereby proclaim the Irish Republic as a sovereign, independent state. And we pledge our lives and the lives of all our comrades in the cause of its freedom, of its welfare, and of its exaltation among the nations. The Irish Republic is entitled to, and hereby claims, the allegiance of every Irish man and Irish woman. The Republic guarantees religious and civil liberty, equal rights, and equal opportunities to all its citizens, and declares its resolve to pursue the happiness and prosperity of the whole nation and of all its parts, cherishing all of the children of the nation equally and oblivious to the differences carefully fostered by an alien government which have divided a minority from a majority in the past. We place the cause of the Irish Republic under the protection of the Most High God, whose blessing we invoke upon our arms, and we pray that no one who serves that cause will dishonour it by cowardice, inhumanity, or rapine. In this supreme hour, the Irish nation must, by its valour and discipline, and by the readiness of its children to sacrifice themselves for the common good, prove itself worthy of the august destiny to which it is called.
Now, hard though it is to believe from Fergal's fantastic oration of that slightly redacted version, the proclamation, when it was delivered, actually drew quite a muted reaction from the sparse crowd of people who were there. IRB member Diarmaid Lynch recalled the few cheers that greeted this epochal announcement furnished an index of the denationalised state of Ireland. The anticlimactic nature of the event was emphasised by the fact that afterwards nobody could even quite remember where the proclamation had been spoken. Some said it was on the steps of the GPO. Any of you who've been to the GPO know there are no steps. Perhaps it was in the doorway of the GPO. Others remembered it under something else that isn't there now, Nelson's Pillar. No one could actually remember, no one was sure. And that muted reaction to the proclamation has always been one of the puzzles of the Easter Rising in 1916. After all, Pearse, the great orator of Irish nationalism, seems to have underperformed. One contemporary said of him, for once his magnetism had left him. It's a puzzle. Anne Matthews, in her, I think, excellent book about 1916, The Citizen Army, gives what seems to me to be at least a plausible explanation as to why Pearse may have underperformed. Most accounts of the proclamation are drawn from or rely on statements given to the Bureau of Military History, taken 30 years after the event. It's been one of the real bonuses for contemporary historians to be able to draw on this incredible archive which has been opened during the last few years. But Anne Matthews quotes from a more contemporary source, the Dublin Saturday Post. And the Dublin Saturday Post in its report says of the proclamation this: "There came from the post office a small man in plain clothes with a bundle of papers under his arm. Escorted by a guard of revolutionaries, he made his way to Nelson's Pillar," maybe it was Nelson's Pillar, "and began to speak surrounded by not more than 30 men, and read the proclamation. So that's from the Dublin Saturday Post. Now, Sir Alfred Bucknell, the Deputy Judge Advocate General to the British forces in Ireland at the time, met Pearse after his arrest, and he remembered Pearse as dressed in a green uniform with yellow staff tabs and a hat rather like a colonial's. Pearse was also a very tall man. He had deep-set eyes, high cheekbones. So in fact, the leader who fits the newspaper description of a small man in plain clothes is not Pearse at all. It is in fact Tom Clarke. And that might make sense for other reasons too. Clarke was the senior IRB leader, having joined in 1878 and taking part in the Fenian campaigns in Britain in the late 19th century. His is the name that appears first on the proclamation. You can see at the bottom there. His is the only name which appears by itself on the proclamation, and having a line to itself. And in contrast to Pearse, Clarke was a slight figure who wouldn't have been in uniform, wasn't in uniform on that day. So if Clarke read the proclamation, as Anne Matthews suggests, it would explain why it perhaps didn't have the rhetorical flourish given to it there by Fergal, but that we might have expected from Patrick Pearse had he delivered the proclamation that day in Dublin outside the GPO. But of course, in a world unlike ours, with no iPhones and Twitter and short videos going up on Vine, it didn't matter, because it's not the performance which has endured, it's the words of the proclamation which have lasted. And we know that those words were predominantly those of Patrick Pearse. Kathleen Clarke, Tom Clarke's wife, reports in her autobiography how Tom came home on the Tuesday of Holy Week, less than a week before the Rising, to say that Pearse had drafted a proclamation of independence, that the military council had approved it. Some additional language was added by the socialist leader and signatory James Connolly about equality rights and the ownership of Ireland. Intriguingly, Kathleen Clarke says that somebody, one of the seven, wanted to take out the reference to equality of women, but was overruled. But she doesn't say who it was, only that it wasn't Tom, and presumably wasn't Pearse. Certainly, if it was Tom, I suspect he wouldn't have been going home and telling his wife. But what powerful and emotive language we have here in this proclamation. Historian Charles Townsend, I think, puts this very nicely when he describes the proclamation as the distillation of a nationalist doctrine, a kind of national poem, lucid, terse, and strangely moving even to unbelievers. The proclamation addresses both Irish men and Irish women. It does so in the name of God and the dead generations, drawing on everything that they had sacrificed. The Republic would be a sovereign, independent state. It would guarantee religious and civil liberty, equal rights and opportunities to all citizens. And then this precious phrase at the end, it would cherish all children of the nation equally, oblivious, it said, to the differences that it said had carefully been fostered by an alien government. Now that proclamation, the language of the Proclamation would meet all of the tests, the famous tests for classical rhetoric by the likes of Aristotle, with appeals to credibility and sympathy and logic. And really that's no surprise, because Pearce, the principal author, was obsessed with ancient Greece and often drew parallels with ancient pre-Christian Ireland. But that classical education was, of course, something that Pearce shared with the great Irish nationalist orators of the 19th century who had gone before him, such as Daniel O'Connell, Charles Stewart Parnell. But what Pearce is doing here in the Proclamation is something very new in his rhetoric that breaks with tradition and stands, I think, in contrast, stark contrast, to the speeches which had gone before. So let's just step back for a moment to think about that earlier tradition because of what it tells us about the Proclamation. After a brief flourish in Grattan's Parliament in Dublin, mainstream Irish politics from 1800 all the way through to the First World War and the creation of the Irish Free State more than a century later, was conducted, much of it in the House of Commons in London. And that foreign location brought with it a particular rhetorical style. Now, to many Englishmen of the 19th century, Ireland and its predominantly Catholic population seemed very alien. And so therefore, Irish orators, Irish parliamentarians recognised that there was an innate hostility by many towards them. And that in order to succeed in the House of Commons, they actually had to, if you like, beat the English at their own game, to beat those parliamentarians at their own game. And so one of the things that the Irish, these great Irish nationalist orators become famous for is the quality of their rhetoric. That some of the finest speakers in the 19th century House of Commons are Irish speakers. But that particular style of oratory is, if you like, a very flowery style. The Irish Parliamentary Party becomes a very flowery party in terms of the rhetoric that it deployed. Even when MPs are excoriating in their attacks on behalf of Ireland, they went out of their way to use rhetorical techniques that commanded respect in the Commons for their skill, for their delivery, and for their panache. So let's listen to an example of Richard Lawler Shiel in 1837. Shiel is one of the finest parliamentarians who's ever spoken in the House of Commons. Here we find him in full flow against the Lord Chancellor, who had earlier referred to the Irish as being aliens in blood and religion.
Aliens! Good God! Was Arthur, Duke of Wellington, in the House of Lords? And did he not start up and exclaim, "Hold! I have seen the aliens do their duty"? When the great captain commanded the great assault at the Battle of Waterloo? Tell me if Catholic Ireland, with less heroic valour than the natives of your own glorious countrymen, precipitated herself upon the foe. The blood of England, Scotland, and of Ireland flowed in the same stream and drenched the same field. When the chill morning dawned, their dead lay cold and stark together. In the same deep pit, their bodies were deposited. The green corn of spring is now breaking from their co-mingled dust. The dew falls from heaven upon their union in the grave. Partakers in every peril, in the glory, shall we not be permitted to participate? And shall we be told, as a requital, that we are estranged from the noble country for whose salvation our life blood was poured out?
Well, magnificent parliamentary oratory of exactly that kind dominated Irish politics throughout the 19th century. O'Connell, Shiel, Parnell, they were masters of it and were acknowledged to be so. And the tradition continued well into the 20th century, so that Irish leaders like John Redmond and John Dillon were still deploying the same tone as Shiel right up to the outbreak of World War I in 1914. But the dramatic events in Ireland during the First World War inspired not just a change of tack politically, they also brought about a change in the tone and the manner of Irish oratory. When war broke out in August 1914, the leader of the Irish Parliamentary Party and the Irish Volunteers, John Redmond, controversially, as you know, urged his Irish Volunteers, now renamed the National Volunteers, to sign up to the British forces. Most followed him, but in disgust, 13,000 members of the Irish Volunteers left, led by Owen McNeill, to form their own continuing Irish Volunteers. And these new Irish Volunteers would go on to provide the cadre of 1916 and the Easter Rising under the leadership of the IRB. Now, these leaders were as included members of the educated elite every bit as much as Parnell and Shiel. They understood the likes of Aristotle on rhetoric just as much as their forebears. After all, Owen McNeill himself was the professor of early Irish history at UCD and among the finest public intellectuals Ireland has ever produced. In fact, when I chaired the history department, every meeting I sat under a rather imposing portrait of Owen McNeill in full academic regalia. I never asked him what he thought. But they recognised that different times required a different kind of rhetoric, that a new kind of rhetoric was required for revolution. And so they defined that rhetoric in almost exactly opposite terms, diametrically opposite terms, to the very flowery rhetoric that we just heard, brilliant though it is, by the likes of Richard Lawler Shiel. So this new rhetoric is less artful, it's harsher, it's tougher, it's more direct, it's more obviously demotic in the way that it appeals to the people rather than to other politicians. And Patrick Pearse was its absolute master. Listen, for example, to the speech that Pearse made in 1915 at the graveside of Jeremiah O'Donovan Rossa, founder member of the IRB, who had died here in New York, but whose remains had been brought back to Ireland to be interred there in Glasnevin Cemetery.
Life springs from death, and from the graves of patriot men and women spring living nations. The defenders of this realm have worked well in secret and in the open. They think that they have pacified Ireland. They think that they have purchased half of us and intimidated the other half. They think that they have foreseen everything, think they have provided against everything, but the fools, the fools, the fools. They have left us, our Fenian dead. And while Ireland holds these graves, Ireland unfree shall never be at peace.
Now that powerful speech by Pearse, the graveside of O'Donovan Rossa, was a turning point not just in Irish history, but also in Irish rhetoric. The speech got widespread coverage, and the new, direct, obviously popular style represented a radical departure in political rhetoric, in its conscious rejection of that florid style of the 19th century parliamentarians. It was, one contemporary later said, the Reveille of Easter 1916. But what Pearse's rhetoric at the graveside of O'Donovan Rossa and the words of the Proclamation of the Irish Republic share with speeches like that of Shields, I have seen the aliens do their duty, or Parnell's no man has the right to stop the march of a nation, is the expression of an ideal about the very nature of what it means to be Irish and to be a nation. In fact, they illustrate, again going back to that earlier speech on the 90th anniversary of 1916, that point, Bertie Ahern's point, that Ireland's history is a shared legacy and a continuous thread. And I think that's what Pearse himself meant when he said that we have kept faith with the past and handed on a tradition to the future. So the words of the Proclamation, controversial as they've been at different times in Ireland's history, have become the epicenter of that tradition. The poet W.B. Yeats pointed out that it's public expression of thought that provides men and women of action with moral authority. The signatories of 1916 and the Proclamation believed that their public expression of thought had indeed given them a moral authority and one that would outlive them. And that's the point, I think, that Thomas MacDonagh was making at his court-martial speech before his execution by firing squad on the 3rd of May 1916. The proclamation of the Irish Republic has been adduced in evidence against me as one of the signatories, he declared. You think it is already dead and buried, but it lives. From minds alight with Ireland's vivid intellect it sprang. In hearts aflame with Ireland's mighty love it was conceived. Such documents do not die. And of course, so it's proved. For here we are, 100 years later, marking the centenary of that moment. Thank you.
Well, that was absolutely superb. Thank you both for, bringing the words of this public rhetoric, this oratory to our ears again. It was really very, very special. And thank you, Professor, for giving us the context, because it was uplifting. We're really, really very, very grateful to you. I know what's now possible is that there are going to be the odd question or two, perhaps, it being the consulate and the idea being it being a two-way street for exchange. So if there are questions, I'd be glad to have them.
Yeah, my name is Bill Lee. I'm with the Irish Business Organization and AOH Division 1 New York County. My question is, the rhetoric at the time was very strong, but the people like individuals like Pearson, O'Connell, do you think that they had a firm belief that they were able to, in 1916, be able to go all the way and establish the republic, or do they think that they were really making a stand, making a symbolic move in anything?
I mean, that's a question that, we can't know for sure. But I think they have a very strong sense of belief in what they're doing and a very strong sense that they are going to make a difference. Whether they believed that they could overthrow the British state, well, that's something different. But I think they have a very clear sense that what they are going to do is going to, in some way, tip the balance. And of course, historically, there was a phase in the 1970s when the importance of 1916 was very much downplayed. I think historians have now come back to saying that actually 1916 and the Easter Rising really is, for itself, but also for the reason that I spoke about of being a springboard to Sinn Féin in 1918 and the War of Independence and then the Free State. That this is a turning point. There's no question about it.
So if there are no other questions, could I maybe pick up the more political point, Anne's question about Northern Ireland, and then the question about, Tom's question about sort of the attitude in Ireland to all this. Why wouldn't somebody want to go to that great event in Glasnevin Cemetery in the summer to honour, as we had done in New York, to great success, a beautiful, moving day organised by many people here in the room, a beautiful event. So why wouldn't people want to go? So on the Northern Ireland aspect of it, Anne, I think that one of the big learnings in the Department of Foreign Affairs was how polarising the 1912 Ulster Covenant reenactments in Northern Ireland were. And the sort of very strong determination in Dublin to have to try and create a space around these years of weaving through other elements of Irish history at the time, which were, in my time, were airbrushed out. The whole history of the Great War in Ireland, the 40,000 Irish men who fought in the British Army in response to John Redmond's very noble call, which was very welcomed in Ireland, his call for people to join. It was the editorials of a young woman in Cambridge who's done a paper on this, Niamh Campbell, I think. But the almost universal welcome to Redmond's statement, Catholic leaders, church leaders, all across local papers saying Redmond's speech has united Ireland in this rally to fight for freedom, that freedom. So it's very interesting. So in Dublin, Anne, there's a very strong sense of a responsibility to approach the commemorations of this period in as inclusive a way as possible, and also recognising the primacy of the facts of it and the primacy, as Richard has said, of the debate about it all. And actually to encourage debate, because we may not have a shared history. We have shared history in Ireland, but we don't have shared perspectives on that history. So through debate and commemoration and all of the whole programme, to try and have a conversation which in itself as a civic conversation is a good thing for us to remember all of this and to be inspired by it and encouraged by it to do better in the future. That's a political point by me as an Irish diplomat. There's a fascinating conference that I will get you all the details of, and if you'd like to go, you're in, which is going to be called Easter 1916 to Easter 1998, which is the journey in Ireland from this moment, this change moment of great break with Britain, to a 1998 that says peace and reconciliation and unity in Ireland is now a matter for the Irish themselves, which will be a fascinating conference. And that's being facilitated. One of the big themes, one of the big conferences that our department is organising. Realities. This is a difficult space for unionism. There was a big debate in Ireland about why would the British royal family be there, etc., etc., etc. The British ambassador will attend the ceremonies in Dublin, and I think because the British family doesn't want, the royal family doesn't want to be part of a controversy, given that they've contributed so much to the recent warming up of relations, I think it's very unlikely now that there'll be a prominent member of the British Army. So yes, there's an edge in it. On the point of why do people feel concern, a personal view as a citizen of the island is exactly in Richard's lecture. This is such a compelling moral case for the use of violence to achieve freedom, that people who are Democrats want to quickly leap into 1918 and the general election and say it becomes mandated, it becomes democratic at that moment. But I think what's really interesting about this, that in the very powerful language, there is the intention to organise elections, there is the flag, there's this Irish Republic flag, there are tricolours, there's a Pierce who surrenders because he's worried about the loss of life. So this is not a bloodthirsty assertion of Irish freedom. So I find great nobility in this document, but I think people in Ireland who maybe, as Richard says, haven't had the opportunity to reflect on it as much as some of us have here in the room, are still a bit thinking, does this give the dissidents in Derry the right to kill a PSNI guy in the back of a road in Derry as they did the other night? Well, it absolutely doesn't. But some people will hijack it to advocate for that route of violence and political violence. But the disjuncture around it, and I think this is where 1998 does come in, is we've all had a revolution in Ireland in our lifetime, which is the principle of consent and the change in our own constitution to say if there's going to be unity in Ireland, it'll be voted on by the people of Ireland themselves. And the British government saying, when we're in for that deal about peace and reconciliation. So that's a revolution too. So maybe we should all make sure we go to this Easter 1916 to Easter 1998 conference and say to Niall Burgess, there'll be chairs for the New York contingent, please, especially. So that's just my take on it. But I do think history is our friend. Let's live the complexity. Let's have the debate. I salute Richard for his speech. Maureen, you're doing fantastic work at Luxman Ireland House. We have a bad clash tonight with your programme. Won't happen again. And thank you all for being here, and thank you for your interest in this great commemorative programme. 2 points. We are going to have a major event on the 7th of January at Pier A from 6 to 8. If anybody would like to be part of that, Charlie Flanagan is coming to New York to have a community event to mark the start of the New Jersey, New York, Philadelphia programmes for the next year. If you'd like to be part of that, please let Mary or Margaret Corrigan, Shane or Anna or I know. You'd be more than welcome to be part of it. And our major planning as consulate continues for coming together on the 24th of April at Pier A, the actual date of the rising proper, and to have a lot of people here in the room. People who would like to volunteer to be part of that, very welcome. We'll have Richard back, but he'll be in more relaxed mode, we hope then, and can join in a sort of a showcase of our culture in the afternoon, and a very solemn commemoration in the morning of the men and the women children who died, and then the reading of the proclamation, the normal state proper protocol. So we'll be having more details around all of the programming on the 7th of January in Pier A. And Anne Anderson is launching the national US programme with Charlie Flanagan here in the consulate earlier that morning. That's more of a media event. So please stay in touch. Thank you for your interest, and let's give them all a great big round of applause.